I am now delighted to introduce to you Ben Deutsch, member of the class of 1985, who will deliver the charge to the graduates. Mr. Deutsch is Vice President for Corporate Communications at the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Deutsch joined Coca-Cola in 1993, and since that time, he has held a number of communications roles with increasing responsibility for one of the world's most global companies and one of the world's most valuable and recognizable brands. In his current role at Coca-Cola, he oversees corporate media relations, global brand PR, social and digital communications, issues management, gee, I just wonder what kind of issues there might be, and internal and executive communications. A former chair of the Board of Visitors at University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Mr. Deutsch serves on the boards of directors of Leadership Atlanta, an organization which fosters service-driven leadership, and of Covenant House, Georgia, which assists homeless youth. He also served as the chair of the board of Special Olympics Georgia and serves on the organization's honorary board. We are honored and gratified to have Ben with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Ben Deutsch.
Thank you, Provost Mangelsdorp. It's 1984 in Madison, Wisconsin. A nervous student settles into his seat in Hebrew 101 in Van Hise Hall. He's taking Hebrew 101 for the second time because he couldn't manage to earn a C the first time around. He thought because he had his bar mitzvah, it would be the easiest way to check the language box. Sitting down in his chair, he fears being called upon. His chest tightens, his breath shortens. He feels sweat condensing on his brow and on the back of the neck and across his entire body. He fears being called on to speak in class. He fears it because he knows the professor is skeptical of his commitment to stay on top of his assignments. He then hears his name being called by the professor, followed by the chilling words, Boa Lua, which in Hebrew means, come to the board. And then he nervously walks to the front of the room. A loud noise rips through the entire class. A disruptive, irritating noise. The noise of an alarm clock going off in a backpack, an alarm clock going off in my backpack. My classmates, of course, found it incredibly funny, but my professor certainly did not. It was the classic work of my roommate, Howie Stillman. Howie, I know you're getting a good chuckle about this up in heaven. And if it hadn't been Howie, there were several other likely suspects, some of whom are here today, who were capable of pulling off such a prank. And so back in August, when I got an email from Chancellor Blank asking me to speak here today, I instinctively assumed it was another alarm clock in my backpack. But the invitation turned out to be real. So I want to thank Chancellor Blank and Senior Class President Maria Giannopoulos for inviting me to speak today, an opportunity that I consider a tremendous honor. Now, I did make sure to check all of my pockets before I came up here, but if an alarm clock does go off, please disregard it. And Wolfie, Ricky, Yuzi, I know where you're sitting. So once I found out the invitation was indeed real, a big question popped into my mind. Why me? What makes me so special that I would be the one chosen to provide the charge to the graduates? Good question. After all, I'm the guy who couldn't even manage a C in Hebrew, right? And then I thought, you know, maybe I was invited here because not because I'm so special. Maybe I was invited here because I'm a very good example of the special things that the University of Wisconsin does for ordinary people. I grew up in a small town on the Iron Range of Minnesota, Virginia, Minnesota, a proud little town of respectful, hardworking people. I was not a highly recruited wonder student. I transferred here after 2 years at the University of Minnesota Duluth, where I excelled at two things: varsity tennis and avoiding the library. But my parents, particularly my mom, always wanted me to go to Wisconsin. And so my parents did not insist that I come here to Madison because they thought it would be my launching pad to greatness. They insisted that I come here to Madison because they knew it would provide me with a great opportunity to discover what I'm capable of. And fortunately for me, there really is something very special here, something that ultimately inspired me to achieve, to care about my education, to graduate and get a great job right out of school as a sports reporter, which had always been my dream. And most important, this is a place where I met a woman named Karen Lester, a woman who patiently dated me for 5 years, then wisely laid down an ultimatum, and then graciously agreed to marry me. She then brought 2 amazing kids into the world and continues to be the best life partner a person could ever want. And as she has done for more than 25 years, she's here today to support me. Love you. So for that and for so many other reasons, I'm grateful for my time here. And each year that has gone by, I've become more and more aware of just how much my experience here as a student, and in particular at the journalism school, has meant to me. It is where I learned that hard work is not just a requirement for success, but also that hard work is a big part of what makes life meaningful and satisfying. So, as a fine example of the great things that the University of Wisconsin does for ordinary people, what is my charge to you graduates today? Well, as I thought about that, and as I thought about the experiences that I wanted to share, it occurred to me that I need to probably explain a little bit about what I've been doing since I sat where you're sitting right now. After a brief time as a sports writer, I went into public relations. I've had the good fortune of working for the Coca-Cola Company for nearly 22 years. And for the past 7 years, I've had the honor of leading an awesome corporate communications team there. It's a great job, and with operations in more than 200 countries around the world, let me assure you, it's never boring. When people have asked me what it is that I do, I usually give them a very simple, accurate, soundbite answer. I tell them, I'm a spokesman. A spokesman. So what does a spokesman do? And even more important, what have I learned in my 2 decades as a spokesman that would be relevant to share with you today? Well, when I think of what it is that I do as a spokesman, it comes down to one simple thing. I represent. Represent. I love that word, represent. My job is to represent my company. My job is to embody my company and connect it not just to the news media, but to the greater world at large. And so what does that have to do with you graduates? Actually, a lot. Because when you think about no matter what career you pursue, you will represent, because that's what you do in life. You represent. Whether you join an established company or start your own, you'll represent that company. You'll represent your family. You will represent your community or your town. Maybe you'll represent your cause or your faith. And yes, as of today, you will represent the University of Wisconsin. But most of all, you will represent yourself. So what are the lessons that I've learned from 2 decades as a spokesman, 2 decades of representing? Well, there are lots of lessons, and many of them were foreshadowed to me by my J-School professors. In fact, there have been many times over the years when the words of Professor Hoyt and Professor Boffman have popped into my head on different occasions, with me then saying to myself, now I know what they meant by that. But 4 of those lessons stand out to me, and that's what I'd quickly like to share with you today. Lesson number 1, listen first. Now, that may seem counterintuitive because you would think that the main job of a spokesman is to talk, not to listen, right? Actually, the most dangerous thing a spokesman can do is talk without listening first. Why? Because when you talk without really understanding what's on the other person's mind, you're almost always going to fail to connect in a meaningful way. That's especially true when you start out in life, because as you embark into the professional world, it is a time in life when it's very natural for you to want to make sure that people understand how much you know. And believe me, I know that you know a lot, because all Badgers are highly educated people. But let me share a little secret with you. Over the years, I've interviewed a lot of really sharp, smart young people, including lots of UW kids. And I've been impressed many times by the smart things many of these young people have had to say. But the young people who have impressed me the most are not the ones who say the smart things. The young people who have always impressed me the most are the ones who ask the smart questions. Because those smart questions that those young people not only know what they know, not only show what they know, but also know what they don't know. And those are the people that I've always wanted to work with. So as you represent, listen first. Lesson number 2, be true. And this one seems kind of obvious, but let me talk a little bit about it. The number 1 rule of being a good spokesman is to tell the truth. If you ever fail to tell the truth, you will kill your own credibility, sometimes forever. A few years ago, at a session on ethics here at the J School, a student asked me if I had ever been asked in my role as a spokesman to lie. And I thought about it, and yes, there was one time when I was asked to misrepresent a situation. And it came from a person in a very powerful position at a volatile time in the history of our company. It was completely stressful. But I'm grateful to be able to say that, 1, with the encouragement of my boss and my colleagues, we stuck with telling the truth. And 2, the person who asked me to bend the truth lasted a very short time with the company. There will be many times in your life when you're going to face similar situations. And while telling the truth may seem like the obvious thing to do as you sit here now in your seats, I can promise you there will be times in your lives when the situation will be complex, murky, and unclear. So assume those moments will come and steel yourselves for them right now. But also know this, Being true means more than simply telling the truth. It's about being authentic and genuine and sincere. It's about being who you really are and not pretending you're something you're not. This is especially true for your generation. Because of the way technology has opened up the world, your generation has had opportunities that no generation has ever had. And consequently, there are now billionaires who are just a few years older than you. And your generation has seen that it's completely possible to exert a huge influence on the world before you even hit the ripe old age of 30. That's great, and it's incredibly exciting. But it's also led to a lot of bluster, with a lot of people pretending to be something they are not, trying to convince the world that vapor is a substitute for hard work and genuine accomplishment. Don't fall into that trap. Dream big and shoot for the stars, but always remember the world hates a phony, and always be true to who you really are. Be true. Lesson number 3, step back and step up. One of the things you learn by being a spokesman is that when the news is positive, you make sure the limelight is focused on people who should be credited for their good work. One of my favorite bits of history at Coke came from a man named Robert Woodruff, who basically ran the company for 6 decades. And he turned a sleepy, struggling Southern soft drink company into a global powerhouse with the world's best-known brand. Late in his life, the world learned that Mr. Woodruff was an amazing philanthropist who had kept his generosity a secret by donating anonymously. In fact, in the last years of his life, many people referred to him by the nickname Mr. Anonymous. That was the way he operated, and he felt it was a key part of his success and the success of the company. In fact, he had a small number of tiny desk plaques made up for key members of his leadership team. And those plaques said this: "There is no telling what a man can do or what he can accomplish if he doesn't mind who gets the credit." I believe that, and I have personally seen how many good things can happen to you when you help other people get the credit they deserve. But there's a flip side to that. Good things also happen to you over time when you actively step forward when the times are tough and the story is negative. Whether it's your company, your family, your friends, or whoever else you may represent, there will always be moments when things aren't perfect. In fact, there will often be times when things are genuinely lousy, or even times when somebody you represent lets you down in a big way. And those are the times when it's most important of all to step up and absorb the heat. Because when you represent, those tough times are the times when people need you the most. So know when to step back from the limelight, but also know when to step up during the tough times. Lesson number 4, and the last one. This is my favorite: walk the talk. As a spokesman, one of the things you learn to spot is when there's a gap between what your organization is promising and what your organization is delivering. Every organization wants to tell a positive story. But in order for an organization to tell a positive story, it must also live a positive story. And so in those times, when you see a gap between the story your organization wants to tell and the story your organization is actually living, you have 2 ways you can close that gap. You can either change the way you'll tell that story, or you can help influence the way your organization is living the story. Or often, you'll do some of both. How is that relevant to you today? Said simply, you need to make sure what you say matches up with what you do. That's the single most important idea I would share with you today. Walk the talk. And as you move along in life, I would encourage you to frequently ask yourself, am I walking the talk? Am I living my life based on the values I tell myself that I have? I say that with great humility because, to be honest, it's something that I have had to learn over the decades, and I'm continuing to learn. For many years, I focused almost exclusively on my job, not just because I had a Midwestern work ethic, but because I had a young family to feed. And creating a strong career seemed like the key to be able to do all of the other things I wanted to do with my life, including living out the values that are very important to me. The values my parents, sisters, brother, teachers, and coaches passed on to me as I grew up. And so over time, I needed to start walking the talk in areas of life beyond working a career and raising a family. For me to feel truly satisfied, I needed to start closing the gap in other areas. It almost started by accident. My first involvement with Coke was working in the company's support of Special Olympics back in 1991. It really resonated with me because my brother Bill was a Special Olympian. He was 10 years older than me, and I would follow him to Special Olympics events in northern Minnesota. Bill always brought a smile to the face of everyone he met, and he never, ever, ever wasted a hug. He especially loved to run track, and after every race, I always found myself incredibly moved and inspired by the way that he and others would compete with such determination, completely defiant in the face of their very real challenges. I learned so much from him and his fellow Special Olympians. And so I increasingly inserted myself in situations where I could become more involved with Special Olympics. First I volunteered, then I joined the board, and then I became the chairman of Special Olympics Georgia. And over time, I realized that I was getting back far more than I was giving, because of the sense of satisfaction and meaningfulness that came with walking the talk, making sure the story that I had been telling myself was becoming the story that I was actually beginning to live. That's been a huge lesson for me, and I've tried to apply it to other things that I care deeply about. And my only regret is that I wish I had moved faster and more boldly. That is the lesson that I wish I could have shared with myself 30 years ago. And that is the lesson that I am honored to share with you today. So Badger Class of 2014, congratulations to you. Remember, listen first, be true, step back until you need to step up, and walk the talk. Most of all, in everything that you do, always remember that you represent. That is my charge to you today. Represent, young Badgers, represent. Good luck to you all. Thank you very much. On Wisconsin.